Have you ever looked at your own life and quietly asked, why can't I just pick one thing? Everyone around you seems to have it figured out, a clear answer, a single lane, one tidy response to, so what do you do? But you? Today it's this, tomorrow it's something else. Next month, something no one saw coming. And the part you never say out loud, you're actually pretty good at all of it. But nobody claps for that. Instead, you get the look, the slight pause before someone says, she just can't seem to commit, can she? They call you unfocused. They tell you nothing real gets built by someone who keeps starting over. And at some point, maybe recently, maybe years ago, you started wondering if they had a point. They don't. But understanding exactly why they're wrong is going to take us a little while. Because what researchers discovered about this type of mind isn't a simple reframe. It's something that changes the way you see your entire history. And we're going to get there. Today, we're going to look at what's actually happening inside your brain, why the world has been getting it wrong for centuries, and I'm saving the most important piece for last. Because the thing I want to leave you with is the thing you probably needed to hear a lot sooner than today. So let's start with what's actually going on in there. Your brain has a network called the default mode network, your DMN. Most people think of it as the mind wandering, doing nothing useful. But for certain brains, it works the opposite way. While other people's minds rest, yours is connecting, pulling a thread from something you read 3 weeks ago and weaving it into a completely different problem you're sitting with today. Building bridges between things that, to everyone else, have nothing to do with each other. On top of that, this brain type carries an unusually strong dopamine response to novelty. Learning something new doesn't just feel interesting to you, it feels like relief, like air. Your brain isn't chasing distraction, it's chasing the thing it was designed to find. You're not scattered. You're running on a different operating system, and you've spent years trying to run it on hardware built for someone else. That system has 4 signatures, and the more honestly you sit with them, the more you'll recognize yourself in each one. The first is what I call the synthesis factor. Your brain doesn't file knowledge by subject, it cross-pollinates. You learn something in one world, and it quietly rewires how you see something in a completely different one. That's not random, that's a feature. The second is the infinite why. You can't let an idea sit unchallenged. If someone tells you how something works, your instinct is to go underneath it. Why does it work that way, and who actually decided that? The third is absolute curiosity. Stagnancy doesn't just bore you. To your nervous system, it feels like slowly running out of air. You don't seek novelty because you're restless. You seek it because going still, for your brain, isn't rest. It's deprivation. And the fourth, this one I want you to hold for a second, because it's the one that costs you the most in the real world, is what I call strategic isolation. You need solitude. Not because people exhaust you, but because your inner world is genuinely rich enough to hold your full attention. You're not pulling away from the people you love, you're processing. But the people around you, they don't always read it that way. And that gap is where a lot of the pain lives. We're going to come back to that, because the relational cost of that fourth trait is something most conversations about this brain type completely sidestep. First, let's look at why the world reacts to all of this the way it does. Because once you see the history, the reaction makes a lot more sense. If this is a profile of cognitive strength, why has it always been treated like a flaw? Think about Virginia Woolf, one of the most important writers in the history of the English language. She moved constantly between literary criticism, fiction, essays, philosophy, restlessly, without apology. She suffered for it. She was institutionalized repeatedly, while her world called her unstable, hysterical, too much to handle. What they were watching, and completely failing to understand, was a mind that refused to be reduced to a single room. Since the Industrial Revolution, the entire architecture of modern society has been built around one instruction: specialize. Pick a lane. Go deep. Don't leave. And for a long time, that worked. For factories, for assembly lines, for a world that needed people to be reliable and interchangeable. But that world was never designed with this brain in mind. And when a woman's mind genuinely can't be filed into a single category, she doesn't just confuse the system. She unsettles it. Because she's living proof that the instruction was never the whole story. So the system does what it always does with things it doesn't understand. It labels them. While she's at home reading across 5 subjects, or quietly building something nobody has a name for yet, they call her arrogant, scattered, lost. She isn't lost. She just knows there are more rooms, and she's not willing to pretend there aren't. If that landed, if you just recognized yourself or someone you love, drop M-type in the comments. I want to know you're here. And if this is a conversation someone in your life needs to have, send it to them. This is the kind of thing most people go years without hearing. So where does this actually come from? Because the origin matters. It tells you something real about who you are underneath all the noise. The first piece is simply how you were born. Some brains arrive wired for rapid learning, cross-domain thinking, finding patterns where others see chaos. That's not trained. It's structural. It's the wiring you showed up with before anyone had a chance to tell you what to do with it. The second piece is how you were raised. This brain flourishes when childhood gives it room. When a girl is allowed to read across genres without being redirected, ask uncomfortable questions without being shut down, explore without someone always handing her a destination. If her environment gave her breadth over boxes, her mind grew into that space. And the third piece is a refusal to comply. These women looked at the preset script, the correct sequence, the appropriate ambitions, the version of enough that society finds acceptable. And somewhere along the way, they quietly decided it didn't apply to them. And this is what I was pointing at in the beginning. The thing researchers found that actually reframes your entire history. It turns out every characteristic that looks like a liability from the outside, the restlessness, the cross-domain curiosity, the refusal to commit to a single lane, maps almost exactly onto the cognitive profile behind the most consequential breakthroughs in human history. Marie Curie didn't just win a Nobel Prize in physics, she turned around and won a second one, in chemistry, a completely different field. When people asked how, she said she followed her curiosity wherever it went. The scientific establishment of her era had no framework for her. She didn't wait for one. She is still, to this day, the only person in history to win Nobel Prizes in 2 separate scientific disciplines. That's not a lack of focus. That's what an M-type mind looks like when it finally stops apologizing for itself. But what Curie never had to navigate, and what nobody talks about plainly enough, is the private cost of being this kind of woman in the relationships right next to you. That fourth trait I mentioned, the isolation one. This is where it gets personal. Being this kind of woman has a relational cost, and it shows up in the same 3 ways, over and over, with different names and different faces, but the same story underneath. The first is the arrogance that isn't. When she goes deep into something, really absorbed, really building, she gets quiet. She stops checking her phone. She stops tracking the ambient noise of what everyone else is doing. And the people around her read that as coldness, indifference, like she's decided they don't matter. But that's not what's happening at all. What's happening is that she's fully alive inside her own mind, and she genuinely doesn't realize that looks like pulling away from the outside. The second is the settle-down conversation. The partner, the parent, the well-meaning friend who finally says, "When are you going to commit to something real?" Not out of cruelty. They just can't see what she's building from where they're standing. They want the finished product. She's still in the middle of becoming it. The third is the loneliest one. The moment someone looks at everything she is and says, "You just don't know what you want, do you?" She knows exactly what she wants. She wants all of it. The depth and the breadth, the science and the art, the career and the creative work, the full life, not the edited version that makes everyone else more comfortable. And she has spent years being told, gently and repeatedly, that wanting all of it is the same as wanting nothing. It isn't immaturity. It's the most honest thing about her. The loneliness of an M-type woman isn't the loneliness of someone with no one around. It's the loneliness of someone who is never alone and rarely fully seen. That's a very specific kind of ache. And if you felt it, you know exactly what I mean. Here's what I want you to imagine. A woman who used to open every conversation about her interests with, "I know it sounds like a lot, but..." She said it so automatically she stopped noticing it. It was a reflex, an apology she made before anyone even asked for one. She had spent so long pre-managing other people's confusion about her that shrinking had become her default posture. The shift didn't come from a productivity system or a new schedule. It came from a single decision: to stop treating her range as a problem she was responsible for solving for everyone else. That decision changed everything. Not because the world suddenly understood her, some of it still didn't, but because she stopped needing it to. She structured her time around seasons rather than forcing everything into the same week. She stopped explaining herself to people who were never going to get it and started spending that energy with the ones who already did. She learned the difference between someone asking, "What do you do?" out of genuine curiosity, and someone asking because they needed her to be simpler than she was. And she stopped performing simplicity for the second group. Her range didn't shrink. Her apology did. Hedy Lamarr was one of the biggest Hollywood stars of the 1940s. She was also, at the same time, developing the frequency-hopping communication system that would eventually become the backbone of Bluetooth and modern wireless technology. She filed the patent together with composer George Antheil. The Navy locked it in a safe, labeled it top secret, and sent her back to the movie lot. Her patent expired before she saw a single dollar from it. It wasn't until decades later, when she was in her 80s, that engineers realized the forgotten name on that document was Hedy Lamarr. Hollywood saw an actress. Her brain just kept going. The world isn't short on specialists. It's full of them. What it's short on, what it has always been short on, are the people who can move between worlds and build the bridges that specialists never think to build. The ones who walk into a room full of experts, pull from 10 different maps nobody thought to bring, and draw an 11th one that changes the whole conversation. That's you. It has always been you. To the parents watching, if your daughter moves through the world like this, curious, restless, wide, don't spend your energy trying to narrow her. Spend it giving her a bigger stage. The world has more than enough people who stayed in their lane. What it needs are people willing to cross them. And to the woman who clicked on this video, the one who has spent years quietly carrying the weight of being too much, too everywhere, too hard to explain. You were never too much. You were just in rooms that were too small for you. Your curiosity isn't the problem. Your hunger to keep learning isn't the problem. The way your mind refuses to stop moving and connecting and building, that is not a disorder. That is a gift that most people will spend their whole lives wishing they had. So the next time someone tells you to just pick one thing, you look at them, calmly, without apology, and you say, "I already did. I picked all of it." Women like you don't need fixing. They need room. If nobody in your life has said this to you clearly, let me say it now. Your mind is not a problem to be managed. It is not a phase you'll grow out of. It is not something to apologize for at dinner parties or shrink down for job interviews. It is exactly what the world looks like when a human being refuses to be less than what they actually are. So keep going. Keep the 5 interests, the half-finished notebooks, the random deep dives at midnight. Keep being the person in the room who asks the question nobody else thought to ask. That's not chaos. That's how you're built. And if you know a woman like this, don't try to simplify her. Just stay close. She'll show you rooms you didn't know existed. I'm Maya. See you in the next one.